The Liberals are not happy with the recent statements from U.S. Ambassador around the trade war, when oddly they should be thanking him. We have some proof coming out that most of Canada's damage is self-inflicted, including from the Bank of Canada themselves. We also have some historical examples showing Canada's been using tariffs to take on the U.S. for a lot longer than people think. Speaking of history, we have to cover some of that, especially as Quebec is putting through some new laws where they basically want their own sovereign nation inside of Canada. That's heating up. A warning to Donald Trump with some of this H-1B stuff. We have some examples in Canada of how, if a program is mismanaged, it can go completely wrong. And of course, the media is silent as we are seeing more and more examples of alleged corruption coming out of the Carney Liberals and some Brookfield stuff that's a little suspicious. There's a lot to talk about in today's video, so let's get into it.
Responding to Donald Trump's tariffs, is conducting a review of our decision to purchase 88 F-35 fighter jets made by American company Lockheed Martin. Of course, this has been a long story, this fighter jet procurement to replace the aging fleet of CF-18s. But now, Donald Trump's ambassador from the United States to Canada, Peter Hoekstra, is tying the decision to purchase the full 88 jets under the contract to the current trade dispute, and suggesting that although that dispute is stalled, it could get back on course if Canada follows through.
Now, I've seen a few points of discussion going on around this jet purchase, and I do think, yes, if the U.S. was coercing Canada that the only way a trade negotiation can continue is if these jets are purchased, obviously that would not be a good thing. But this has also been 20 plus years in the making of talking about Canada potentially buying these jets. There's agreements in place to buy at least 16 with up to 88. So Canada politicizing the purchases around the trade negotiations certainly aren't helpful, especially when there's a suspicious connection to Sweden who wants to supply us the jets that we might pivot to. And the funny thing is, I had talked about this exact transaction a couple months ago, and I had said, hey, why don't we double down on this purchase and use this as leverage to bring the U.S. back to the table in a positive way, saying, hey, look, we have to buy 16 jets. We want to buy up to 88. Why don't we try and get a deal? Now it's potentially getting used against Canada, which, to be fair, I don't like if they're going to use it as a sticking point as to not come to the table over the jets purchase if we deal with Sweden. But it shouldn't even have come to that point if we had used it as a positive negotiating tactic previously.
Now, usually the job of a diplomat and ambassador is to kind of build relations between two companies and grow those relationships. Peter Hoekstra is a different kind of cat. He has been really much more aggressive in his criticism while he's in Canada of the Carney government, and he was the person who actually challenged, not that long ago, Ontario's trade representative to Washington, David Patterson. He challenged him, berated him, apparently used obscenities or expletives about when they were discussing the Ontario government's ad using the words of former U.S. President Ronald Reagan, talking about tariffs that really enraged Donald Trump and brought that negotiation to an end. Now, Hoekstra last night was speaking to a group of manufacturers and was asked about some of the comments he had made in the past, including the reference that Donald Trump often makes, or at least used to make, when Justin Trudeau was Prime Minister, to Canada becoming the 51st state in the American Union.
Now, some of my favorite stuff about the Liberals freaking out about Pete Hoekstra. First of all, I think it would probably be good if we did get a new ambassador. It seems like tensions are flared a little bit. That being said, they ask him about 51st state stuff everywhere he goes. He answers a question, and then the news runs away with it saying like, oh, they're doubling down on 51st state. Stop asking him about the 51st state everywhere he goes, and maybe it won't become a talking point every single time. But the reason why, oddly, Canadians should be thanking this tension, which is the same thing that I've said in other videos. We should be thanking the US, we should be thanking Donald Trump, because Canada is a complacent country. Canada gets nothing done, and this has been able for us to hold up a mirror and recognize the fact that Canada needs to improve. Our domestic internal trade barriers, which is costing Canada billions of dollars, and I've said this in other videos, if we cost ourselves billions of dollars because we can't deal with our own provinces, how good of a trading partner do you think Canada has been? Well, we got an example we're going to get into shortly that maybe Canada's part of the problem. And this breaking story about this positive announcement that the provinces signed an agreement to drop the trade barriers on goods. Well, maybe not all goods and maybe not important stuff which Canadians need help with the most.
Well, Canadian leaders here at home are taking more steps to keep people buying Canadian in the face of Donald Trump's trade war. Provincial and federal officials yesterday signed another agreement to drop more interprovincial trade barriers. And Janice McGregor joins us live from Ottawa with the details. Janice, I know you've been digging into this. Can you give us a breakdown of what this latest move is all about?
Well, the basic idea is pretty simple. Going forward, if one province determines that a given product is safe, the province next door is now agreeing to take that province's word for it rather than duplicating and having its own certification process. In announcing this latest deal, BC's Minister for Jobs and Growth, Ravi Kahlon, called it the largest red tape reduction in Canadian history. But
Canada is known for its horrible red tape, its awful regulations, it's impossible to do business and, even inside of Canada, deal with customers. And they're calling this the largest removal of red tape in history. Well, let's get into the realities of it shortly. If it's the largest ever, you can see where there's a problem.
If you have been following the interprovincial trade barrier file for the last decade or so, you probably are feeling like you've heard that rhetoric before, like when Canada's internal free trade agreement came into effect back in 2017, and they were supposed to be dropping all these kind of barriers at that point,
and nothing happened.
Or even earlier this year on Canada Day, which was the original deadline for all the provinces, territories, and the federal government to have dropped the internal trade barriers in this country.
Which Liberals celebrate all the time about how this is happening. But again, in a second, we'll get into how useless this is.
This latest mutual recognition agreement represents incremental progress. I was looking at the actual deal this morning. It's 45 pages. I can tell you that more than 3/4 of the pages in the actual text list exemptions that various provinces and territories want to have. So good.
3/4 of the pages are just exemptions that they're not willing to remove their barriers on. Once again, how good of a trading partner do you think Canada is with international countries when the provinces don't want to deal with each other inside of Canada? Can you understand why maybe the US was a little frustrated with trying to get competition going inside of Canada? And just wait until I get to these other stories.
Goods that they don't want to be covered by this elimination of red tape. They're going to maintain their own regulations for those goods nevertheless.
This part's really funny.
Provinces to expand it, because right now it will not apply to food and beverages. They still face an awful lot of regulations across this country. Agricultural products that move across borders are part of a federal standard that is administered by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. But for a long time, local businesses that sell only in their local communities have been reluctant to have to comply with a federal food safety standard. So provinces have been maintaining their own systems.
So long story short, even under existential threat, according to the Liberals, even being under attack like we've never seen before in Canada, they didn't exempt food, agriculture products, drinks, alcohol, a ton of things that could be traded within Canada. We are keeping our own invisible barriers inside of Canada. And that's why Bloomberg put this article out from the Bank of Canada saying Bank of Canada warns vicious circle of weak productivity. And the key takeaways are the Bank of Canada says Canada's anemic productivity growth system is a problem that needs to be urgently addressed by governments and businesses. And we have an example of the government making Canadians' lives worse. So this isn't just to beat up on Canada. This is how Canadians can get a better standard of living without blaming Americans the entire time, without using Donald Trump as a scapegoat the entire time. All we've done is said, let's blame somebody else and not fix our own problems. These are the wake-up calls when we see articles like this. Ottawa wants to keep beef prices high deliberately. Here's how. Canada doesn't have a beef shortage. It has a policy problem. Ottawa's outdated import system is quietly keeping prices high and Canadians are paying the price. This is from Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, the food professor himself. We recently received information from a reliable industry source about how the federal government is administering beef imports permits. If accurate, it raises serious concerns about whether Ottawa is knowingly sustaining an outdated and opaque system that keeps beef prices unnecessarily high at a time when many families are struggling with food costs. This is more than a bureaucratic issue. It directly affects affordability. Canada's beef import rules operate under a tariff rate quota system. Looks like Canada has been using tariffs, the exact same thing that the US was complaining about, to block beef imports. It's hurting Canadians domestically. This is something that could be changed to help Canadians' standard of living. So now the Canadian government, to win an election, drove a wedge between us and the United States when we have modern examples showing Canada was not being the best trading partner. And if you think modern is the only examples, it's been a long time. Let's introduce ourselves to something called the national policy. So the national policy was a central economic and political strategy of the Conservative Party under Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald. That would be Canada's equivalent of George Washington. That's how long this has been in place. And many of his successors in high office, it meant that from 1878 until the Second World War, Canada levied high tariffs on foreign imported goods to shield Canadian manufacturers from American competition. High tariffs were intended to broaden the base of the Canadian economy and restore the confidence of Canadians in the development of their country. The tariff on most foreign manufactured goods was increased, affording substantial protection to Canadian manufacturers. So since the start of Canada, we have had tariffs in place against the US to help build Canada's economy. And the reason why it was against the United States is because we share the largest land border in the world. They're our #1 trading partner. So they said, well, let's set up tariffs based around what the US can trade with Canada to protect Canada's industry, the businesses, and help develop the Canadian economy. Can anybody run any parallels to what's going on in the US right now to what we're talking about right here? Yeah, it seems like Canada is not so innocent. Well, the worst part is, historically, Canada has always been so fragmented with the provinces and the territories and Upper and Lower Canada and all these things. So we still have residual problems domestically. And that's why we're seeing fragmenting in Canada, because as the Liberals spent the last 10 years trying to break down all of the social cohesion, all of the national identity, all of what they're rewriting history entirely. So it's as if Canada never existed. We end up with this. Quebec's little-noticed plan to unilaterally declare independence. A proposed law declares that Canada doesn't exist as a country and is just a federal union whose rules can be ignored at will. The Quebec National Assembly is currently reviewing a proposed Quebec constitution which would declare a province of free national state, unbeholden to the crown and able to ignore Ottawa at will. The 40-page document describes a fully sovereign and autonomous state of Quebec, free to choose its own judges, conduct its own foreign policy, override any federal law, and participate in the common institutions of the Canadian Federal Union only where it feels like it. Canadian YouTuber JJ McCullough just did a recent video on this. And yes, this is real. Quebec's looking at creating their own nation inside of Canada. We are seeing all these land claims start to heat up. There was just another one in BC, the one in Kitchener that's continuing to heat up. We're destroying Canada from the inside. We are wrecking the sovereignty of Canada from the inside, and America is being used as the scapegoat. When we have things like this, which are more likely the problem, it is a demographic chart. It's from Daniel Tyree, and he's showing what Canada used to look like back in 1981 and how the demographics changed in 2021. Let me tell you, things got way worse after 2021. But yeah, it used to be 93% Canadian, and now as we continue to trickle down in 2021, it's at 69.8%, but it's a lot lower than that. It's much closer to 60, which is why when Trump made this statement here, which I'm going to play, this is a warning to the Americans. You could be seeing what's happening in Canada right now. We got examples right after.
You know, in some cases, you're building extremely complex plants. You're building plants to make computers and to make telephones, to make a lot of different things, missiles. But you're building plants that make things that are very, very detailed, and you have to have great knowledge. And you're coming here and you find if we don't have people that did that before, we are allowing you, and I may take a little heat. I always take a little heat from my people, the people that love me and the people that I love. They happen to be toward the right of center, toward the right. Sometimes they're way right. But if you have to bring people to get those plants opened, we want you to do that, and we want those people to teach our people how to make computer chips and how to make other things. You can't come in, and I'm explaining.
So he is right, and I understand the merit of his argument, which is, hey, if we're going to onshore all of this manufacturing, we will need some level of people to come in, train the local population, make sure they have all the on-the-job training that the factories can run, and then they will leave. The problem is, if you are not extremely specific with the rules, extremely specific on how these programs can be used, you need to make sure they can only come over for specific jobs, specific factories. They are out of there as soon as the training is done. If these programs remain in place, the rules over time continue to loosen, and it broadens who's covered under these things. And then you end up with what's happening in Canada, where these people who came over on temporary status are being told to leave, and now they're freaking out. And of course,
ਤੇ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦਾ ਸਾਥ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਵਾਂਗੇ ਫਿਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਾਹਤੋਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਆ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਆ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਆ ਤੱਕ ਆਪਣਾ
that entire group is Indian, mostly Khalistani, mostly Punjabi, the entire group. He's not even doing this video in English because these people fell under such a broad H-1B, temporary foreign workers, skilled workers. This is the problem. These people came in as skilled workers, but then you find out the jobs that they're working, and almost none of it was from skilled workers. And the mainstream media put some coverage out on this, but of course it's supposed to make them look good.
Protesters are gathering outside Queen's Park this morning after the province suspended a skilled workers immigration program. Over 2,500 had their applications suddenly canceled overnight. Clara Pasica is at the protest. So, Clara, why these sudden cancellations?
Well, Dwight, that's a very good question. Certainly a question that several of these protesters are asking. As you can see, several people have gathered here with all sorts of signs bearing messages like "We followed every rule, respect our time, effort, and journey." Now, these are skilled trade workers and their families. They've been protesting all week. They allege more than 2,600 workers had their applications under the skills trades stream of the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program.
They're really doubling down on the skilled trade rhetoric, which is why also, again, this is the warning of how these programs can be misused. One of the companies they list that these people are working for is doing layoffs of Canadian employees right now. So we've got these skilled workers coming in and working for the companies where layoffs are happening. That makes sense.
Suddenly canceled en masse. Now, many of them work for companies like Bell and TELUS. Others work in automotive industries. So they now have no ability to work. And
Bell and TELUS are just telecommunication and internet companies who, yes, are doing layoffs right now, also have monopolies, treat Canadians poorly. The service is not getting better with all of these skilled tradespeople that we need.
Many cases or no ability to work soon. Many say that their applications or stages of their applications were actually already approved. They were looking forward to becoming permanent residents, but now suddenly being told that their application process has actually sort of stopped.
These people feel like they're entitled to be here. That includes America. They, for some reason, assume that because they've come here, their feet have touched the ground, that they just are entitled to it. And they say it online all the time when they make these protests. That's why the warning is out there that unless there's a super specific H-1B program, it's way harder to get the people to leave. You guys are seeing it happen with ICE right now. It's way harder to get them to leave once they're inside than to just block them from coming in the first place. But here we have some updates on Carney and his trip to the UAE, and there's been some weird stuff going on in the last 24 hours.
Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney began the first of 2 days here in Abu Dhabi with a meeting with the United Arab Emirates, or UAE's president, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. And the two men talked about some regional security concerns, and the PMO wouldn't say exactly which security concerns they were talking about, but the big one in this region right now is the civil war in Sudan. And the United States and the United Nations believe that the UAE is providing weapons to one side in that bloody civil war, and it's believed that Iran is providing weapons to another side in that civil war. So in that
that sense, it's become a bit of a proxy war for the region, and the UAE and the Gulf states are often at odds with Iran. The UAE believes that Iran's proxies in the region, and that includes disrupt trade and are disruptive generally to the region.
Yep, so Mark Carney just announced that we did get a new trade agreement done with the UAE. Still no deal with the United States, but he's talking about removing tariffs from dealing with the UAE. Very interesting, especially since we know that 1 week ago, Brookfield, who Carney's very involved with, oh no, sorry, I forgot, he no longer works for Brookfield. He's not involved at all, even though we know that Bruce Flatt, so shout out to Andy Lee, she's been covering this really well. Bruce Flatt and Brookfield were just there a few days ago. Khaled bin Mohammed bin Zayed meets executive management delegation from Brookfield Corporation. So basically, one of Mark Carney's best boys was just in the same place, meeting with the same people, talking about economic cooperation with a private company. Mark Carney comes a week later, that private company that Mark Carney's involved with. Mark Carney comes a week later to talk about how Canada and them can do deals. Nothing to see here. Now, remember when we talked about the jets at the beginning and how Canada wants to start working with the Swedish company instead of working with the F-35s? And one of the things that people have been saying is, well, if we get this Swedish jet deal, then that's going to mean that we will get Canadian jobs because they'll do some of the manufacturing and maintenance inside of Canada. Oh, by the way, the manufacturing and maintenance inside of Canada would be very similar, if not the same, for the F-35s, and most of that stuff's already planned and in action and underway because we've been talking with the US about buying their F-35s for 30 freaking years, so they've been planning to have that already done. But for some reason, she's mentioning Brookfield directly by name, and why that's good that Canada and Sweden could be working together.
Canada and Sweden are demonstrating what practical solidarity looks like. A powerful example of this, if I may, is actually Westinghouse nuclear fuel facility in Sweden in the city of Västerås, now owned jointly by the Canadian companies Brookfield and Cameco.
Brookfield, that timing's not suspicious at all, but keep in mind, Canadians were warned. Canada is about to discover Mark Carney is the man with reverse Midas touch. The rock star former governor of the Bank of England has left a trail of destruction behind his glossy jobs. And this article is from March 2025. Canadians were warned. We knew Mark Carney does what's best for Mark Carney. He does what's best for Brookfield. We can see this happening in real time. And some of the legacy liberals are finally getting their payouts for all of the corruption that they were doing over the course of their tenure. I don't know how this is not being investigated. This is so suspicious. This is so strange. All the news has done is announce that it happened. They are not announcing that they're being investigated for corruption, for conflict of interest, for ethics. Freeland will move to UK for new job at prestigious Rhodes Trust. That's like a member of Congress moving to another country to run a trust while they're still serving. Liberal MP Chrystia Freeland will move to Oxford, England to take on a new position next summer administering the Rhodes Trust. The charity is famous for its prestigious Rhodes Scholarship, which offers students from around the world the chance to study at the University of Oxford. It announced Wednesday evening that Freeland was appointed CEO of the Rhodes Trust and Warden of Rhodes House. But Freeland herself has not announced plans to resign as a member of Parliament. There you have it. We're seeing it in real time. Basically, somebody who spent the last 10 years hollowing out Canada, destroying the national identity, putting in policy that has been absolutely horrific, is now getting put out to pasture with her cushy job where she gets to manage a trust, which everybody knows these trusts and charities allegedly are often used for money laundering and other different ways to tip the hat to get the payouts, especially ones like this where they get to recruit people through as Rhodes Scholars, and once again, they get away with it. She destroyed Canada and she gets to run off into the sunset. Justin Trudeau gets to run off into the sunset. This is what continues to happen because of complacency inside of Canada. Mark Carney is going to do the exact same thing. He's going to set up contracts so that Brookfield continues to win, and once he's no longer prime minister, he is going to helicopter out of here and we will be left holding the bag because we refuse to make any real positive changes inside of Canada, and we are destroying our relationship with the United United States, continuing to double down on Europe, which we now see has been a long-term plan for these globalists who are destroying Canada, which is doubling the warning for the Americans on any of the H-1B and the skilled stuff. It's something that could go a little wrong. But if you made it this far in the video, you absolutely rock. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're trying to get these videos out in front of more people. We are trying to grow the channel. If you want to support the channel, you can do it directly through the link down below. You can also do it directly through YouTube. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.